Now, the families of hostages held in Gaza remain in the dark over whether they will be reunited with their loved ones after a 4-day ceasefire with Hamas was delayed. As part of a temporary truce agreement with Israel, which was announced yesterday, Hamas had said it would release some hostages in exchange for Palestinian captives. But Israel now say the transfer will not happen until tomorrow at the earliest.
Meanwhile, the director of the Al-Shifa hospital, the largest medical complex in the Gaza Strip, has been arrested by the Israeli army. This follows 24 hours of aerial strikes on Gaza, which Israeli forces claim hit 300 Hamas targets, including tunnels and weapons sites. Israel's President Benjamin Netanyahu is also expected to meet with the UK's new Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, later today.
Well, joining us live from Jerusalem in Israel is author and journalist Douglas Murray. Douglas, nothing's been formally said about why this hostage release and exchange, in fact, has been delayed. Do you have any idea?
It's not entirely clear. It was expected yesterday night that it would happen this morning, and then there was a delay, and nobody knows exactly what the cause of it is. Needless to say, the negotiations are ongoing, incredibly intense, clearly, and causing an enormous amount of anxiety here in Israel. After all, I was with the families of many of the kidnapped victims last night as they were waiting for news of their loved ones. And you could already sense there that there's a deep amount of concern inside Israel about this situation. The deal is meant to be, as you said, basically a 3-for-1 deal where 3 Palestinian prisoners, criminals, will be released by Israel in exchange for each one of the hostages. It was said yesterday that this would include the children who were stolen from Israel on October the 7th. Obviously, that in itself is causing an enormous amount of anxiety and waiting in Israel to see if that is the case, see how many of the children may be returned. And, of course, some of the families feel that, you know, this is just the first step, but they want the next steps, their own loved ones. There are parents of people of 19, 20, 21 who were at the music festival, for instance, when that was attacked and people were kidnapped. So there's an enormous sense of waiting inside this country at the moment, and a hope, of course, that there'll be some good news in the morning.
Douglas, great to have you on the show. Now, while we're all hoping to God that some kind of deal is struck and the hostages do get released tomorrow, some people are speculating that this truce, ceasefire, humanitarian pause, or whatever the fashionable term is for a cessation of hostilities, at least temporarily, might be the prelude to a permanent peace. Meanwhile, Netanyahu and indeed the Israeli representative in the United Nations yesterday said, no, we are determined to destroy Hamas. Meanwhile, Hamas, while paying lip service to these current negotiations, pointed out that their fingers are still on the trigger. So is it your belief that this could be permanent, or that after the hostages are released, we could pretty quickly be back to hostilities?
First of all, I mean, we'll see how many hostages are released. For Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who are holding the hostages, they're a kind of golden ticket. It's horrible to talk about it in those terms, but that's how Hamas and Islamic Jihad see it. They see it as being that as long as they have hostages, they've got the ability to negotiate. They can negotiate ceasefires, temporary though they may be, and much more. And one of the concerns about this, which I think viewers in Britain need to realize and perhaps haven't heard enough, is that prisoner exchanges of this kind are incredibly painful in Israel for so many reasons. But one of them is the fact that Sirwan, the Hamas leader in Gaza, who planned and led the military-sized operation against Israel on the 7th of October, was himself released in an earlier prisoner swap. So in a previous prisoner swap, on that occasion for the abducted soldier Gilad Shalit, the very man who organized this massacre was released by the Israelis in a prisoner swap. So this is an incredibly fraught issue. As I say, not just the issue of how many of the hostages are alive, how many are actually going to be released and in what stages, but also this question of the price that Israel always ends up paying in exchanges of this sort.
Douglas, David Cameron over in Jerusalem to meet Netanyahu is likely to tell him, look, mate, perhaps ease off the bombardment a little bit. You're not winning the optics here. Similarly, we found out the IDF have now arrested the director of Al-Shifa Hospital. Hospitals have played a huge part in the propaganda war. Why is it, do you think, that Israel are not able to win when it comes to international public opinion?
Well, that's a very long answer I'd have to give to that question. Arguably, they never do. And there's a small window of sympathy that the world extends to Israel after a massacre like that on October 7th. Not that there have been many such occasions in the last 70 years. But it extends a little bit of sympathy and then immediately says ceasefire. The problem there is, in my view, is that we return always to the status quo ante. You know, most Israelis do not believe they can live beside Hamas. They saw what Hamas did. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, was in Be'eri this morning. It's a small kibbutz. I visited it myself. It's right by the Gaza, filled with peaceniks, left-wing, pro-peace types. Many of them employed Palestinians from Gaza, worked with them, tried to encourage coexistence. And Be'eri, where the Foreign Secretary was this morning, was one of the kibbutz most hit by the massacres of that day. It was a bloodbath in that place. And so I know that what Lord Cameron has already said in response to that visit is a strong defence of Israel's right to defend itself, an understanding of what Israel is doing in this. And my own view is, for what it's worth, that one of the problems internationally is simply that, as I've said often in recent weeks, the Israelis are never allowed to win in a conflict like this. They're allowed to do a certain amount of bombardment and then they're told to stop. But what you just described about the head of the Al-Shifa Hospital is a very good example of this problem. The international media, as you say, have been fighting over this hospital. Is it just a hospital? Is it not? If it is a hospital, it's one of the only ones where there are tons of grenades in storage. Somebody from the BBC said the other day, I think Jeremy Bowen said, well, the Kalashnikovs that were found by the Israelis in Al-Shifa could have been for the security department. I think, oh yeah, the grenades for the cardiology department. I mean, everybody has known for years that the Shifa Hospital is a Hamas headquarters. Amnesty International, not a friend of Israel, 10 years ago said that the Shifa Hospital was the command center for Hamas, where, among other things, they torture, kill Palestinians from rival factions who they don't agree with. It had been known to be not a hospital, but a Hamas command center and torture headquarters. And if even Amnesty International knew that 10 years ago, why are so many people doubting it today?
Indeed. Last question, Douglas. I mean, do you anticipate a return to hostilities? It's a kind of a new version of the question I asked you earlier. But if, praise God, there is this exchange, if these hostages are released, do you anticipate a return to hostilities fairly soon afterwards?
I think everyone does. Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has said that his goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas have some Israeli hostages. How can you do both of these things at the same time? Hamas will try to eke out the release. It will try to play as long as it can on the world's sympathies. It will try to present itself as being a decent entity in some way because they have the decency to release some of the children that they've kidnapped. We'll see tomorrow. But I don't think there's any doubt in Israel that although the desire to get the hostages back is intense, always. As one of the fathers said to me last night, every one of these lives is precious. However, most Israelis believe they cannot live beside Hamas. And I think that's a message that the rest of the world needs to understand. We couldn't, by the way, in Britain. There's no way we could live with Hamas on the Isle of Wight, bombarding us, kidnapping people, massacring people. There's no way we could live with it in Britain. And there's no way that the Israelis can here.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time.